Alright friends, in this video we'll try to understand a bit more on Kubernetes. So Kubernetes is fundamentally a container management service. Now we did talk about why we need container management in the earlier video, and in this video we'll try to understand you know how Kubernetes works and some of its components. Now if you run hundreds of containers, right? In virtual machines, you will need some management, and that is where Kubernetes is going to play a critical role. It's an open source solution, so it was built by Google and then handed over to Cloud Native Foundation. So it's a CNCF project which is there. Design of Kubernetes is such that you have a master server where the typically we also sometimes call this as a control plane in the industry, where actual APIs are sitting and containers would run in the nodes below over here, right? So you can this node pool can resize, have multiple pools of nodes also if required. So the context of it is that it will allow the containers to run. The worker nodes are the place where containers run. Master is uh, the control plane, and worker nodes are sometimes also referred as a data plane. Now, master server has a few services running, right? And one of the first services to be aware is the API gateway. Now, with API gateway in place, all your API requests which comes from your laptop or any device you use, right? Instructions which you goes to this API gateway, delivers it to all these nodes, right? Each node has an agent in it called kubelet. So kubelet is sitting everywhere, and it's a kubelet gets instructions of actually from the API gateway and executes that in the worker node. Now, along with that, right, you also have other services which are running in the master. Okay, you have a database which is over here. It is called etcd. This is the database which is there in the it's a part of its master, which maintains the state and all the information about the cluster. That's your etcd. Now you also have a service called scheduler service. Now, what is the job of this scheduler? Right? So when you have this scheduler service, job of scheduler service is to decide when there's a need to launch a new container, which node it should go and launch. So it's a decision maker for that. So it looks at the container requirement which you have specified. It looks at nodes and their specification. It tries to decide based on the rules which you have created or design which you have done around it, and will launch based on that. Right? So it's a job scheduler. Now, scheduler, I always say, is a lazy service, does not want to go and launch the actual container. So it writes to its configuration file, and there's another service which actually goes and start it, and that service is called deployment. It's a job of the deployment to actually go and launch the container. All right, so that's your deployment service. So you have an API gateway, you have a scheduler, you have a deployment service, which does the actual execution. Deployment actually has multiple different types of methods in it for deploying the service, including the replica set, and there are a few more. We'll not go so deep in this video about those, but maybe in future videos we'll talk about that. Another service which you want to be aware of is the service itself. Well, what is the job of this service? Service is actually going to create connectivity between the container and the outside world, or rather the pod and the outside world. And now, containers may come up, go away with time, and the IPs attached to them also may change. To give a consistency to them, right? You have a service can be either publicly exposed, that is externally available, or it can be private for solution A to talk to solution B. Let's say I have two applications, back end and front end, I want to talk to each other. They can also leverage on a service with a private IP. Service with a public IP will be for external traffic. Right? That's how the design is. That's your service. Right, so we did talk about quite a few things inside the master. Node, as I said, has a kubelet agent running. It also has a proxy server to set up the communication. So it's called kube proxy, right, which is always running over here in the node. Now, along with this, we also have a concept called pod. Now, what is a pod? Pod is the smallest deployable unit as such. You can consider this to be a configuration around your container. So, when it comes to Kubernetes, we generally wrap a container around a pod and then launch it. A pod may carry one or more containers in it. Generally, you want to have one-to-one mapping. But in case two containers were very highly dependent with each other, so we call this kind of a design principle as sidecar principle, or helper containers. We put them in a single pod. So they're very much dependent on each other. It's good idea is to have it in them in a single pod. Otherwise, a one pod, one container mapping is the recommended one. Pod brings in the IP address, the storage to the container inside it, and if there are more than one, then those resources will get shared between the container in it. That's your smallest deployable unit, referred as pod. Right? So that's a bit about introduction to Kubernetes, and we will talk more about compute options in GCP in the next video. Thank you so much for watching my video, and if you want to learn more about GCP, do subscribe to my YouTube channel. Thank you and have a great day ahead.